Lando Norris has laid down a statement win here in Singapore tonight.
I wanted to be happy for Lando Norris as he crossed the finish line in Singapore and finally survived lap 1 after a pole position start. And for a brief time, I was. But that quickly came to an end as Daniel Ricciardo gave a very emotional interview in the post-race show. And if you feel like you need emotional support after that, you're not alone. I know I sure do. Welcome to the support group meeting for Daniel Ricciardo fans. Let's help each other get through these trying times. Let's rewind a little bit. Daniel Ricciardo's soft and cuddly appearance, coupled with his ferocious and fearless driving style, earned him the nickname the Honeybadger. But where did this come from? As you may recall, Honeybadger Don't Care was a very popular meme back in the day, when some guy named Randall did his own narration over National Geographic footage showing just how fearless honeybadgers are.
This is the Honeybadger. Watch it run in slow motion.
This video with over 100 million views debuted back in 2011, just like our beloved Danny Rick. And while the Honeybadger meme did fade into obscurity relatively quickly, Danny Rick didn't, and if anything, he's probably the last person carrying a torch for the Honeybadger meme.
Watch this, look, a snake's up in the tree. Honeybadger don't care.
Rumors were circulating before the Grand Prix that Daniel Ricciardo could lose his seat after Singapore. And now, just 13 years after he walked into our lives, it looks like he's going to be walked off the grid mid-season.
Honeybadger don't give a shit, it just takes what it wants.
He sat in his car for an extra long time after the race, trying to savor the moment. He explained to the media that he has to be prepared for this to be it. But the real question is, are we prepared for this to be it? Red Bull has always followed the Sith rule of two: a master who holds the power, and an apprentice who covets it and trains to one day usurp their master. Danny has been playing the Red Bull game long enough to have seen himself on both sides of this power dynamic, multiple times. By his second season at Toro Rosso, he beat his teammate Jean-Eric Vergne and found himself in the seat of an actual Red Bull by 2014, where he wasted no time thrashing Vettel and was even touted by many to be the best driver on the grid that year. But unfortunately, he didn't have the best car, or more accurately, he didn't have the best engine, so he had to settle for third place behind the dominant Mercedes. So how did Danny go from being the best driver on the grid to losing his seat twice in 2 years? It's an unfortunately common tale in F1. His talent peaked at a time when he didn't have access to a championship-capable car. By 2018, Max was starting to consistently beat Danny, and the team was lining up behind Verstappen. At the same time, Red Bull very publicly dropped Renault as their engine supplier, and was moving to Honda for their power units. The same Honda that built that GP2 engine that broke Alonso and triggered his first retirement from F1. To further complicate matters, Red Bull was allowing Max to get away with murder, and Cyril Abiteboul was driving up to Danny's house with dump trucks full of money, begging him to join Renault. So he did. At the time, this seemed like a relatively safe decision, as the Honda unit was not just an unknown, they had a bad reputation, and Renault was a full works team that Red Bull had won 4 championships with. Who could have known that Honda would somehow do a full 180 and build a beast of an engine, while Renault would continue to be super mid? It seems like everyone who goes to Renault sees very quickly that they don't have what it takes to win and jumps ship. Danny had a 2-year contract with them, and did take the team to new heights, getting them back on the podium, but he signed with McLaren just 1 year into his deal with Renault. And at the time, this seemed like a good move. In fact, you could even say that it was the right move, because if Danny had been able to drive that McLaren competently, he would be in a championship-capable car right now, and might even be giving Max a run for his money. But we all know that didn't happen. Instead, this is where it all falls apart. He managed to win a race with McLaren, which gave us hope, but the honest truth is that his driving style was fundamentally incompatible with the cars McLaren gave him. Is that McLaren's fault? No. The sign of a truly great driver is their ability to adapt their driving style. A difference in car, conditions, etc. means a different racing line is necessary to go as fast as possible. Danny may like a twitchy rear end that allows him to brake really late, but that's not what the McLaren needed to be fast. And obviously it wasn't impossible to extract pace from the car, as that's what the young Lando Norris was able to do, as was Carlos Sainz before him. What followed was what I consider to truly be the end of Danny's career. What he tried to do was stick it out with McLaren, break down his driving style, and learn what he needed to do to go fast in Papaya. But what he actually did was break down his spirit and lose what made him special. His bravado. That Honeybadger don't care combination of ferocity and fearlessness. The ability to intuitively pass and be the last of the late breakers. He tried to go cerebral when what he needed most was in his heart. Athletes cannot be actively thinking about what they need to do before they do it, especially when they're going over 300 kilometers per hour. That's what training and practice are for. Learning what you need to do and when to do it. So in the moment, you don't waste time thinking about your actions. You just instinctively know what to do. I'm not saying athletes don't think. What I'm saying is the speed at which they have to make decisions is so fast that they can't waste time second guessing themselves. They need to be able to trust their instincts. The same instincts they have spent their entire lives honing. The cold hard truth is, Danny is not an adaptable driver. He has a driving style that suits him, and when he has a car that suits that driving style, he is a force to be reckoned with. Or at least, he was. In early 2022, when Sainz was spinning out and Leclerc was performing, that's how we knew that Charles was a cut above Carlos. When Max was setting world records whilst Checo, a very competent and experienced driver, was struggling to keep the car on the road, that's how we knew Verstappen was on a whole other level from Perez. And when Lando Norris was continuing to extract pace from a car that the veteran Daniel Ricciardo couldn't figure out, that's how we knew that Norris was on a different level. So when Danny got dropped by McLaren and Christian Horner rescued him like a man finding out that his ex-girlfriend had surrendered their old dog to a shelter, it really did feel like he was getting a second chance. But the reality is, he was never going to get that chance. In fact, I would argue that Red Bull taking him back only to let him languish at the junior team is a lot less like rescuing your old dog from a shelter and a lot more like an ex taking you back only to end things a year later when they realize they still don't want to be with you for all the same reasons as before. The only difference is that this time they got to dump you instead of you leaving them. Red Bull clearly had no intention of promoting anyone to the second Red Bull seat, as there were many times in 2023 and 2024 when the obvious correct decision was to replace Checo. At best, keeping Ricciardo in the wings was a way to keep Perez compliant, but all they've managed to do is break the spirits of two drivers. Sergio Perez went into Red Bull as one of the 5 drivers in history to pull off a last to first victory. He's obviously not trash, but he's also not compatible with the car they've given him, and that is painfully obvious. Given that they brought back Ricciardo specifically after he did a tire test and matched Verstappen's pole lap at the same track in the same car, you'd think they would have wanted to put him in it just to see if he could do better. He certainly couldn't do worse. That's why I think there's something else at play here. If I had to guess, they're either worried that he would take too big a bite out of Verstappen's success, or he was only ever there for them to use as a threat if Perez ever stepped out of line. And I'm more inclined to believe it's the latter. I can see someone like Jos Verstappen insisting they make sure the second driver is playing the role of Barrichello, and is explicitly there to support the lead driver by towing him in quali, running interference in races, and grabbing the fastest lap point when Max doesn't have the luxury to do it himself. If Ricciardo had truly been brought back to see if he could cut it in the top team, bringing him back to the junior team expecting him to trounce their entrenched driver of 3 years was an odd move, especially if the car doesn't handle like the Red Bull does. They picked up the Honeybadger knowing he was only truly good in a car that handled like a Red Bull, then told him he could only get in the Red Bull if he could prove he could be good in a car that wasn't one. I'm not even saying this was unfair to Daniel. I'm saying this was a waste of a seat. They knew he couldn't be exceptional in that car, so why did they even bother? They would have probably been better off just keeping him as a reserve driver at Red Bull and then giving the junior seat to Liam Lawson. That way, they could benefit from the good PR of having Danny on the team, and his mere presence would be the threat they need to Checo. Meanwhile, they'd still be building experience within their junior ranks to make sure they have great drivers lined up for the future. This is one of the many problems with Red Bull owning 2 teams. They can just sit on drivers and let them languish, because they don't have to truly commit to them. Other teams can't make these half commitments. They have to either offer the driver a proper seat or no seat at all. Honestly though, what I truly can't figure out is why they don't just toss Danny into that second Red Bull seat to see what happens. Like literally just pull Perez for a race or 2 and see how it goes, even if it's not a permanent arrangement. But since it's clear that Checo's performance was never the deciding factor in his retaining the seat, it begs the question, why did they keep Ricciardo this long? I have a pretty good idea as to why they kept him on until Singapore. It is a brutal race that requires exceptional fitness to endure, and this ain't Danny's first rodeo, but unfortunately, it might be his last. And Will Buxton described it best.
I don't like that at all. A broken Daniel Ricciardo is that's a really difficult thing to watch.
I'm with you, Will.
It's a terrible day for rain.
What do you mean? It's not raining.
Yes, it is.
Oh, so it is.
And if you're not done crying about Danny yet, why don't you watch this music video that I made about his return to the grid? As soon as his retirement is announced, that will go from being hopeful to bittersweet. I'll see you there.